What's going on, everyone? It's Ty the TV Guy here, and today I wanted to do a series review of the Apple TV Plus show, Ted Lasso. This is an uplifting, wholesome show that features, of course, the main character, Ted Lasso, who goes from being an American football coach to going all the way overseas into Europe to be a professional soccer coach. Along this journey, he and a lot of the other characters in the show undergo a lot of change, whether that be physically, emotionally, mentally, and we get to follow him along that journey and have a lot of fun along the way. Interestingly enough, it's been announced recently that there is likely going to be a season 4 of Ted Lasso, even though most fans and even the creators of the show themselves thought season 3 would be its natural conclusion. But Jason Sudeikis, who stars in this show as the main character Ted Lasso, recently gave the thumbs up to coming back for another season. With that being said, you might wonder why I want to do a series review even, but I just finished this show. I was finishing it up as those announcements came out on the internet, and I thought I might as well still review it anyway because those aren't confirmed necessarily, and I just thought season 3 was kind of a natural conclusion, so I could still treat this as a series review, even if it's not officially over. So I'm just going to be talking about Ted Lasso as if it's over and how I've liked it up to this point. Before I get into any more details, make sure to hit this video with a like and subscribe to my channel for more TV content. I talk about a bunch of shows like Stranger Things, Breaking Bad, Rick and Morty, and so many more, and I'll have a lot of new exciting content associated with those shows and even movies sometimes, so please hit my channel with the sub. It helps out more than you know. So I'll start out giving a broad overview of the storyline and kind of things I liked and disliked within it. It starts out with, like I mentioned in the introduction to this video, Ted Lasso coming into a new environment. He really knew nothing about the sport of soccer, which makes it ironic that he's becoming a soccer coach of one of the biggest soccer teams in the world and one of the biggest soccer leagues in the world. But we come to figure out that it's because the owner of the soccer club wanted to spite her husband, the former owner of the club, by making the team as horrible as possible because it would break his heart for the team that he loves to perform so poorly. So if you've seen the show, you know what I mean. If not, it might seem a little wonky and hard to comprehend. But basically, the owner of FC Richmond didn't want the football club to do well. That's why she hired Ted, an American football coach, to come from America all the way over to coach this team, for a sport he knows nothing about, has no knowledge of, no prowess. So that is the basic premise to start, I guess. But this show quickly branches out far beyond that, as at the end of season 1, going into season 2, and then for the rest of the show, they do get into a lot of mental health, a lot of social and political discussions with one of the characters, Sam Abasanya. Obviously, like your typical show, there's plenty of love interests and relationship struggles, such as between, the love triangle of Roy, Keeley, and Jamie Tart. There's Rebecca Walton, the soccer club's owner, who has her love affairs, one being with Sam Abasanya. There's Ted Lasso getting over his divorce and kind of how that sends him into a downward spiral in terms of his mental health. And I think the most poignant points touched on in this show are those regarding Ted's mental health. And it's certainly something I didn't expect early on in this show, as I thought it was just going to kind of stick to being a fun, happy-go-lucky, wholesome show the entire time. And it does stick to that, but it does get into more serious discussions within those wholesome moments throughout the show, especially in the latter stages of it. And for the most part, I think they did pretty well hitting on these points. I don't necessarily relate to every single thing these characters go through, but from where I stand, I think they talk about them in a very thoughtful and thought-provoking manner. So the deeper topics of the show, Ted dealing with his father's suicide, which he's never really come face to face with. He's kind of always just tried to push it into the past. And, that kind of bubbling up because of the struggles he's having being so far apart from his son, across the world. And also just recently getting divorced. Not to mention the added stress of being in this new environment, coaching a sport he knows nothing about, meeting all these new people, having all these expectations of these crazy football fans in Europe. I thought the culmination of these factors, bringing it all together with the new therapist that they bring to the team, which kind of forces Ted to vent for really the first time in his life. He's always just tried to stay positive, stay happy-go-lucky, always say the right thing, always do the right thing, always be kind to people. But eventually, you saw a little bit of his anger about what his father did to him, about, his mother, how kind of off the wall and crazy she's been, and how she's also ignored the problem of his father's death all these years. You see it come out of him, and I think the therapist coming to the team triggers that. And so once again, I do think uncovering Ted's mental health was the most important and the most interesting plot point of this entire show. Ted is just such a fun-loving character, and like I said, he's always kind, he's always respectful. He never expects people to treat him as kindly as he treats them, and it doesn't impact how he views them or how he plans to treat them in the future. He continues to show that love no matter what you do to him. If you do him wrong, if you disrespect him, he will always shake your hand, keep a smile on his face, and it's really easy to root for a character like that in this show, and I loved going along the journey with him. And honestly, especially by the end of the show, most of the characters kind of get in that zone where you have no choice but to like them. Jamie Tart begins the show as kind of like a cocky prick, and that he's pretty conceited and thinks that he's better than everyone else, and he certainly changes his way to the point where in season 3, he's one of the nicest characters and players on the team. Another strong point of this show is the manager of FC Richmond, Rebecca Walton, who I mentioned earlier in this. She's trying to spite her ex-husband early on in the show, but her character is so much more than that, and she really becomes a good companion and friend to Ted Lasso as he, kind of struggles some of these things being overseas, like I've already talked about. She is, the one that is often there to comfort him when he's having his panic attacks. She is always lenient with him, if he needs to make a phone call to his kid back at home, if he needs to deal with a personal affair, if he wants to do something a little off the wall with the team, something that isn't very standard or goes with the protocol as far as being an English soccer coach. She was very lenient with him. She gave him a long leash, I guess you could say. And I think other than Jamie Tart, she had the second best character development in the show, from really having bad intentions to having almost the best intentions as the show ended, and her and Ted's relationship was pretty special. I also thought Keely was a solid character. I don't have too much to dive into with her. I don't think she had as much depth as Jamie, as Rebecca, as Ted, of course, but I think she's probably like the 4th best character in the show. Always solid. I found her personal affairs to be pretty interesting. But now to get into the stuff I didn't like about this show, I do think Roy Kent was just a weak character, and I think they overdid his big angry man persona a bit too much. I thought his delivery and repeatedly saying like the F word over and over again was just so over the top, and it really just wasn't a believable performance for me. And I know this is a different style of show, like I'm not expecting an Emmy level performance from these side characters or someone like Roy Kent or anything, but I just didn't believe the performance. I didn't believe that this character was portraying like a real football player. It didn't feel real to me. That's just why I didn't like Roy. And though I did love the wholesome energy of this show in general, I think a lot of that energy that I enjoyed was in the situations Ted was involved in. When it was some more of the team stuff and, the rest of the players kind of doing some wholesome and, in my opinion, slightly corny things, I didn't really buy that or enjoy that as much. The wholesome moments I liked the most were when Ted was giving speeches to the team, and even though he knew nothing about soccer, he could really strike the chords of the players and say just the thing they needed to hear to inspire them to go play well. Or moments where he'd gather with the Diamond Dogs in his office and talk through people's problems and really just be the best friend anyone could ever ask for. To me, Ted and his wholesomeness is what made it so special in this show. I didn't really enjoy a lot of the character moments where they attempted to shoot for that type of feeling. So really, outside of Jamie Tart, I didn't really enjoy the other soccer players. I already talked about Roy Kent. Sam, though he was pretty involved in the show, and some of the things they talked about with him were semi-interesting, I still didn't really enjoy like his demeanor and how he was the exact opposite of Roy. He could just like never get angry at anything. I thought his performance and just the way they wrote him was a bit over the top as well. I personally just like characters that feel more human, and within this show, I think Ted, the main character, acted the best. I think all of it was the best for him, but I think he just felt like in every circumstance, he acted the most human. Yes, he was a super nice guy and he stuck to that 98% of the time, but then you saw him break down. You saw that he was kind of doing that for a reason because he was so hurt by his dad taking his life and how that affected him and his family that he would never treat someone disrespectfully, because he would never want to drive someone to the point where they could say, I made myself do this in part because of how I was treated, in part because of Ted Lasso. So yeah, I've talked about the storyline in general. I've talked about how I like the mental health discussions in the show, specifically related to Ted, but I think there's also some good material there with Jamie and Rebecca and others. And I've talked about a lot of the key characters and kind of how much I enjoyed them. I did forget to talk about Nate, who I really just don't like. I mean, he's not a character that's very likable, even though he's supposed to be kind of redeemed by the end of season 3, or at least somewhat redeemed and forgiven, which of course Ted forgives him because that's just who Ted is. But as an audience member, as a viewer, I don't really care for him, and I never found anything about him to be very compelling or interesting. I mean, when he switched to be the West Ham coach, that was kind of a shocking moment. It had that wow factor. But other than that, the Nate storylines really just never struck a chord with me. So now I've talked about all the characters, but finally, I just want to stress just how fun this show was. I know I'm kind of analyzing everything here because that's just kind of what I do. But at the end of the day, this was a fun show just to watch at night. I watched most of it with my mom. And, we would just laugh at a lot of the funny one-liners Ted had, a lot of the references he made. A lot of times people on the team wouldn't even know what he's talking about because he's referencing something either from his childhood, from back home in America that they'd have no clue about, or, a combination of those things. But yeah, this was a fun show. So many fun-loving moments between the characters. The relationships were generally interesting and kept me engaged. I liked all the banter between the team, between the coaches and the players, between, the fans at the bars. I thought everything like that played into the show and the universe it was trying to build really, really well. And all in all, I would recommend this show to someone who's interested in mental health discussions, or someone just trying to have a good time with the show, wanting to watch, a really funny comedy, a different comedy. I don't know exactly what lane I would describe this as, but it's certainly a lot different and takes a lot different approach than any show I've ever watched. So I appreciated that. I'd say recommend it to friends, but just as good as me, it's a pretty breezy watch. I thought the pacing of the show was pretty good as well. It didn't really drag on. So yeah, overall, I really liked Ted Lasso. I think I'd give it a 7.4 out of 10, somewhere around there if I had to rate it. And I would definitely recommend as a fun show to watch with family and friends. Thank you guys for watching. Let me know your favorite Ted Lasso moment in the comments. I've really enjoyed watching the show, and if the season 4 rumors are true, I will be tuned in. I'm not quite sure how they're going to follow up the ending of this show. I thought it was, pretty conclusive. Ted moves back home. Everybody there seems to be finding happiness within their lives, post-Ted era. But I guess we'll see what happens. Like I said earlier, like this video, subscribe to my channel for more TV and movie content. I appreciate you guys watching this whole thing if you're still here. And until next time, this is Ty the TV Guy. I'll see you later.